And in fact, a horrible tragedy was averted because the building that was going to be blown up was at the top of a hill. Had it been blown up, the rubble would have hit the neighboring building, which was just slightly down the incline, with the force of an avalanche, and taken that building too. It would have been 800 dead. As it was, there were 300 who were killed. But the failure of that bombing attempt did not prevent Putin from taking power. No one drew the proper conclusions. Those who tried to investigate were murdered.
What is going on, everybody? We have an awesome episode today with David Sater, one of the first journalists ever let into the Soviet Union and the man who exposed Vladimir Putin. This will be a two-part podcast, with part two diving into David's experiences in the Soviet Union, Stalin and his reign, and then classified KGB tactics and much more. So make sure to subscribe or follow for that second part. Also, as a reminder, if you enjoy this episode, you can do me a massive favor and please share this podcast around. Word of mouth is the best marketing, and the more you all share, the quicker we can grow and continue to bring on more and more great guests. And of course, if you share on any social media, be sure to tag us. We love to see it, and we want to be sure to interact with all of you. With that, if you enjoy, be sure to leave a like or a 5-star review if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and let's get to the episode. So now we've entered the fall of the Soviet Union and fully into the Yeltsin presidency. A presidency or leadership marked with corruption and kind of crony capitalism, the birthplace of what we see in modern day Russia. And then there's a figure lingering in the background, and that would be Vladimir Putin. So can you explain their dynamic and relationship and how that kind of created or opened the path for eventual Putin's rise to power?
Yeah, the situation in Russia got very, very bad. As I was mentioning, the national income fell by 50%. That didn't happen even under Nazi occupation. Those people who acquired the property through dishonest means, they stripped they stripped the factories and enterprises and stashed the money in accounts offshore. They many needed services, including medical services, were neglected, and there began to be a catastrophic and even atmospheric, I would say, death rate. People began dying in incredible numbers. Russia soon had the highest death rate of any country that was not at war.
Was this due to just...
This was due to disease, accidents, crime, general despair. Demographers have a category which they call surplus mortality. By that they mean the number of deaths that could not have been predicted on the basis of pre-existing trends. And in Russia during the 1990s, the number of surplus deaths was 6 million. People were just dying literally like flies. There was an article in Novaya Gazeta, which is a Russian newspaper, an interview with a gravedigger who was interviewed in a new cemetery plot outside of Moscow that had just been opened up. And he said to the journalist, he said, "Do you see these graves? These are all young men. We never had that before. A lot of the tremendous amount of mortality in the 35 to 50 male age group. Male life expectancy fell to something like 57. The only other place where you could find such a low male life expectancy was in Somalia, where there was a civil war going on. So it stood to reason that people were very, very discontented with Yeltsin. There was another incident I can recall, which I myself was a witness to. It took place in Vladivostok, where I was working on my second book. And the bay had frozen over, but the ice was unsafe. Nonetheless, people were going out onto the ice to fish. And as a result, many of them fell into the ice broke. They fell into the bay. They had to be rescued. In some cases, they were killed. So, the police warned fisher people not to go out on the ice. The ice was not safe, particularly after one case in which a person was drowned. But nonetheless, the next day, fishermen were all out on the ice, just as if nothing had happened. And the police came and they chased them off the ice, except for one old man who refused to leave. He was just sitting there fishing, and he was some distance out, and they were calling to him repeatedly and was saying, "Get off the ice." He said, "It's dangerous. You can fall into the bay. We can't rescue." Finally, they went out and got him and dragged him back to the shore. And they asked him, "Why is it that you ignored our warnings? You understand that you can die this way." And he said, "Better to be dead than to live like I'm living now." And the material conditions were just absolutely horrific. And under those conditions, it was very unlikely that Yeltsin and his corrupt family would avoid prison once his term was up. And Yeltsin began basically a search for someone who he could rely on to protect him, and his family was the epicenter of corruption in Russia. And they chose Putin, and they chose well, because he himself had been a very big bribe taker in St. Petersburg, where he was deputy mayor. There were 2 criminal cases that had been started against him. And he had demonstrated in his relationship with Anatoly Sobchak, the corrupt mayor of St. Petersburg, whom he helped escape when Sobchak was from Russia, when Sobchak was about to be arrested, that he was loyal toward those who were his superiors. And so Yeltsin decided on Putin, but the device for making sure that Putin could then be elected president was the bombing of the apartment buildings in Russia in 1999. In the summer of 1999, I was in Moscow, and everyone understood that it was very tense atmosphere. Everyone feared that something big was going to happen. That it was understood that there were various rumors. Some people thought that there would be a war between criminal gangs that would be used as an excuse for declaring martial law. Others thought maybe they would blow up some government buildings, perhaps try to blow up the Interior Ministry building. There were various hypotheses, and then suddenly residential buildings began to be blown up, and they were blamed on the Chechens. This was used as an excuse to start a new war in Chechnya. The war was victorious, at least in the initial phases, and that rallied support behind the new leader, Vladimir Putin. September 8th, Yeltsin had a telephone conversation with Bill Clinton in which he said, there's going to be a new leader. It's Vladimir Putin. You'll like him, he's going to work well with the United States. He's a reliable man, a very good man, and he's going to win. Now, Yeltsin's popularity rating at that time was 2%. Putin's popularity rating at that time was 2%. How he could be so sure that Putin was going to win, that's a mystery. But on September 9th, the following day, the first apartment building in Moscow on Guryanov Street was blown up in the middle of the night, and 100 people were killed and hundreds were wounded. Those bombings terrorized the whole country. People organized patrols at night to make sure that no one was trying to put a bomb in the building. And Chechens were blamed for the bombing, even though they denied having anything to do with it. But on a few weeks later, another bomb was found in a building in the city of Ryazan, southeast of Moscow. And that bomb was identical to the bombs that were used to blow up the buildings in Moscow and other cities. And the persons who put the bomb in the building were caught. And they turned out to be not Chechen terrorists, but agents of the FSB. Now, the FSB then claimed that this was a training exercise to test the people for their vigilance. But the country was already in a state of panic. The last thing they needed was a false alarm. In fact, that bombing had been timed for the beginning of the invasion of Chechnya, because the following day they began bombing Grozny, the capital of Chechnya. But Putin's popularity soared. The Russians did not ask any questions, and what's worse, the Americans did not ask any questions. Not only did they not ask any questions, but they helped in the cover-up. Madeleine Albright, who was then the Secretary of State, was asked by Jesse Helms, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. She was asked, do we have any proof that it was the Chechens who bombed those buildings? And she said, no, none has been produced. She then was asked, well, if the Chechens didn't carry out these bombings, who did? And she refused to answer. She said that we are against terrorism in all its forms, as if that was in any way a surprise. With that, she saved, in effect, Putin's presidency. He hadn't been elected yet. And she became complicit in the cover-up of those bombings, what had happened. It was obvious to me what had happened, particularly after Ryazan. I later went to Ryazan, talked to the people there. They said that it was clear to them this was no training exercise, that in fact there was a real attempt to blow up the building. And in fact, a horrible tragedy was averted because the building that was going to be blown up was at the top of a hill. Had it been blown up, the rubble would have hit the neighboring building, which was just slightly down the incline, with the force of an avalanche, and taken that building too. It would have been 800 dead. As it was, there were 300 who were killed. But the failure of that bombing attempt did not prevent Putin from taking power. No one drew the proper conclusions. Those who tried to investigate were murdered. And Putin became was elected the president of Russia on the strength of the popularity he gained fighting the Chechens, who were credited with bombing those buildings. All of his corruption, all of Yeltsin's corruption, that was all forgotten. All of the rage in the country over the theft of property, that was overlooked. attention of the country was diverted toward these bombings and toward the Chechens as the supposed culprits.
So once that bomb went off, everything that was known about Putin and Yeltsin just disappeared.
They changed the conversation. It was suddenly people were no longer talking about the corrupt division of property. They were no longer talking about the poverty, the hardship, the theft. They were no longer talking about Yeltsin's family, about and of course about Putin. And they never did bring up Putin's own criminal record. They were talking about retribution against the Chechens, and Putin was elected president, and those tactics have been used ever since. And that also indicated what kind of person Putin was and why it was important to stop him in '99 when he could have been stopped, but he wasn't.
Can you provide to give some context to Chechnya? So, for many might not know where Chechnya even is located, but also this wasn't the first conflict. They had the first war, which was extremely brutal. We were talking about this a little bit at lunch as well, how they have a level of extremists there, and that I know the war, I mean, I've seen videos of this even circulating too. There was things like beheadings. There was things very grotesque fighting that, led to a massive amount of fear within the Russian populace as well. So can you maybe speak to that first conflict as well and how that carried into the eventual second?
Okay, Chechnya is a small area. It's about the size of Connecticut. In the Caucasus Mountains. These are mountain people. And they have a fierce tradition of independence and of resistance to Russia, and they declared their independence. And Russia launched a war against them in 1994, actually on New Year's Eve, 1994. And we know the motivation for that war because it was explained by Yeltsin's security chief to one of the parliamentary deputies. He said that we need a short, victorious war in order to boost the president's rating. Well, the war was neither short nor victorious. It ended, in fact, with a Chechen victory. But that's the logic. I mean, apparently it didn't occur to anyone that that was a bad reason for having a war, just to boost the popularity of the president. And at that time, the Russians accepted their defeat, and in 1997 even signed a treaty in which they agreed with Chechnya, in which they recognized Chechnya de facto as an independent country. And then also agreed that any questions between the two countries would be settled without the use of force. Well, of course, their version was that since the Chechens had committed a terrorist act, they were entitled to forget the treaty. And that's a warning as to what we can expect if they sign a treaty with Ukraine, by the way.
That's what I was just about to ask, yeah.
And so they did, in the end, the second war, which was fought in order to put Putin in office, was better planned and it was victorious. And they adopted the policy of Chechenization. They put Chechens in charge, gave them unlimited bank accounts and the right to do anything they want in the republic. Whereas and the present day ruler of Chechnya, Ramzan Kadyrov, is a Putin ally, and but maintains a highly independent existence there in Chechnya.
Didn't they absolutely decimate Chechnya? I mean, both conflicts, but the second one specifically, I've heard many times that it was, I mean, many people obviously died, but Chechnya itself was just level. There was a level of Russian aggression that was obviously unmatched for a country so small.
Yeah, absolutely. And but then they poured money into it, and they poured money into Kadyrov, the Chechen leader, who was both vicious and corrupt, and is still in power there, but is loyal to Putin.
So you spoke to this as well. Can you break down the fifth building a little bit more? So the situation that happened there, because for many, again, it's sad how little people genuinely know about this, but for many, they would look at that fifth building, what happened, and the fact that they're getting caught at that point and be like, well, this would blow the doors open. There'd be no chance that Putin could have survived. And yet very little happened to it.
Yeah, in a different society, that would have been true, but not in Russian society. Russian society, there's a real absence of civil society. And also from the point of view of the West, the idea was so fantastic. It was so threatening. It was so unbelievable that he would murder hundreds of his own people that way, that we just didn't want to face it. That was the reality as far as the Ryazan bombing was concerned. It was the perpetrators were noticed. They called the police. The police had been getting calls like that regularly. Didn't want to come. They insisted. Police came, and the daughter of the man who made the calls insisted that they go down into the basement because they saw them bringing bags down there. The basement had been used as a latrine by the local, alcoholics, and they didn't want to go down there. But they finally did go down, and they went down there and they saw a bomb, and they came back up and immediately evacuated the whole area. And at that point, there was a dragnet in the city of Ryazan. The whole city was cut off. Airport, train station, highways. Pictures of the suspected bombers were put up in every window in every store. A telephone operator listening in on the interurban telephone lines heard somebody saying, they've got the place surrounded. How do we get out of here? And the voice answered back, leave one by one. And the operator was convinced she was listening to the terrorists, gave the number to the local police. They checked the number. It's the number of the FSB. And then they caught the terrorists and they presented FSB identification. But the FSB then said that this was a training exercise, a test of vigilance. But I mean, that's absurd.
So they didn't even come out immediately and say this. There was a search for these guys.
Well, while that was going on, they congratulated the head of the FSB, not the head of the FSB, but the head of the police, National Police, the Ministry of Internal Affairs. He congratulated the citizens of Ryazan for thwarting an attempted terrorist act. And it was only after they arrested FSB agents, after they were caught, that they said, well, actually, this wasn't a terrorist attack. It wasn't a terrorist attack. It was a test of vigilance, a training exercise. But under the law in Russia, a training exercise involving civilians requires whoever conducts it to inform all government authorities, and no one was informed. And people testified afterwards that this was no training exercise, that this was the real thing.
I mean, that's just unbelievable too. It's like
everything that happens in Russia is unbelievable. I mean, it's as I wrote in my book, that if you want to understand Russia, you have to learn to believe the unbelievable.
So the FSB takes their time to get this story straight. And you're one of the first people early on that is coming out and really starting to dissect this problem. We're seeing that there is clearly something wrong with the truth. What was the initial feeling in Russia? Were they just too wrapped up in nationalism for the people to even be questioning the situation?
That was one thing. And the other thing is that, for example, people were interviewed afterwards as they went to vote and said, who do you think blew? They went to the place where a building was blown up, and they interviewed the neighbors and they asked them, who do you think blew it up? And they said, the FSB. Who are you going to vote for? Well, Vladimir Putin. Well, how can you vote for Putin if you think it was the FSB that blew up the buildings? He said, well, there's no proof that Putin was involved, even though he had been head of the FSB. It's the kind of crazy logic. Remember, this is a people that was raised on the kind of logic that two candidates is formal democracy, one candidate is genuine democracy. I think that at the root of it is the impression that Russians have that all politicians behave this way, and therefore, what Putin did was maybe brutal, but it was normal.
It was needed. Yeah.
It was even needed because he was just trying to gain power, and power is everything.
So, bringing it back a little bit, you mentioned there. So Putin is pretty notorious about him. Two things. One would be his criminal background with St. Petersburg. I'd love to dive into that a little bit more. And then also the fact that he was a pseudo KGB agent, that he was supposed to be this. Again, when I talked with Michael Zager, he's basically saying that this was relatively overblown in terms of his security, time within the security forces. But I'd be interested to hear your perspective of both what that looked like for Putin and how, those two items kind of shaped him.
Well, I mean, the criminal side, he was criminal right from the beginning. He took part in this oil for food program to relieve hunger in St. Petersburg. They exported the oil, were paid for it, never bought the food. And that was investigated by Marina Salye, who was a member of the Leningrad City Council, who after Putin was elected president, hid in the countryside, far from where anyone could find her, for fear of retribution. He was part of the mayor's office, and some of the biggest financial interests in St. Petersburg at the time were the criminal gangs, particularly the Tambov criminal organization, with which Putin had regular contact. Putin had the reputation in St. Petersburg as a very big bribe taker. In order to get a permit to do anything, you had to pay bribes to Putin. He was in business, as I said, with the Tambov criminal organization, and they worked together. He was charged. There were two investigations, one for embezzlement, the other for fraud, and those were shut down after he became president. But it's interesting that Yeltsin would nominate him for that role, or he would choose him for that role, knowing that he was under criminal investigation for corruption.
Had something over him as well. You got to look at
that. There was plenty over Yeltsin. In fact, I mean, in the case of the apartment bombings, I believe it was Yeltsin who gave the okay.
So, okay. And again, so Putin had time within the KGB. How do you think that helped formulate? Because we talked about them, when you first arrived in the Soviet Union and seeing how they operated with people. How do you think that formulated the psychology of Putin and would, in many ways, open the doors to operate how he does in terms of a leadership position?
What is the KGB? I mean, KGB is, among other things, a kind of secret fraternity in which people are highly paranoid, in which they they live in a world of phantoms. They insist they have their own codes, their own language. They are ready to kill without hesitation and to kill each other. So that, of course, is not good preparation for public service in a normal society. But yeah, of course, it had its effect on him, because that's the those were the values that were inculcated there, and right from the very beginning, by the way.
So,
in every office of the KGB, there was a picture of Felix Dzerzhinsky during the Soviet times. Dzerzhinsky, and this is when Putin was in the KGB. Dzerzhinsky was the author of the Red Terror.
Curiosity here, in terms of talking about Putin's psychology. And this is what's very interesting is, we keep referencing that the ideology of communism really took a foothold in Russia, and many of the people now are subject to that ideology, whether it's...
Well, the aftermath of, the ideology left an imprint on people's minds, and even if they don't explicitly support it, many of the basic propositions are still widely shared.
And that's what I'm curious with Putin, is that in Western media, we've heard everything from, he's a fascist, that he's, a Marxist, whatever it might be, and that, he's looking to bring back the old Soviet Union. What do you think Putin's ideology is in terms of communism, in terms of restoring the Soviet Union? Is it to reach that kind of communist society that was in the past that we were referencing some people look back on with fond memories? Or is it just a continuation of power, whether it's crony capitalism, whether it's fascism, or whether it's communism?
I think it's the latter, but it's important to bear in mind, Putin was, and Sobchak, they supported the resistance to the August 1991 pro-Soviet coup. In August 1991, people who were loyal to the Soviet system tried to seize power in order to hold the Soviet Union together. Even though Putin now says that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical tragedy of the century, he himself was active in trying to overturn the coup and of course, therefore, break up the Soviet Union. So I think that in the case of Putin, it was the same with Yeltsin. It was whatever would suit the interests of their personal power. Nothing. There's no thoughtful framework there.
So we look at the first situation, which happened in the apartment bombings in 1999. You highlighted that this wasn't the only situation that we've seen in Russia. In fact, this is almost a common occurrence.
Well, this was decisive. This is what brought, the apartment bombings were the most important episode in Russian history. They're the ones that brought, that saved Yeltsin and established Putin.
If that bombing doesn't happen, what happens to that Russia? Do people look at that point in time? Was there murmurs of, once again, restoring the Soviet Union?
Not of restoring the Soviet Union, but there would have been revenge against Yeltsin and his family. And they would have been without protection. I was told at the time Yeltsin is ready to blow up half of Moscow in order to protect his corrupt family.
And what were Western leaders doing at this point? I know
God only knows what they were doing, because there was such stupidity. Not long ago, Tony Blair was on the BBC, I believe, or CNN, I've forgotten which, in which he was saying, when did Putin change? Because he was a big backer of Putin. He had treated Putin as a great new leader. All the information about the apartment bombing was out there. I had put it out there, so I know. But in reality, the real question was, when did Tony Blair finally find out what an idiot he is? Not when Putin changed. Putin never changed, and the information that was necessary in order to understand that was there. Um, but they didn't want to face the reality. They didn't want to face the reality for several reasons, I think. First of all, because the reality was too horrible and it was too unbelievable. And who's going to believe that somebody would be so vicious as to randomly murder 300 randomly chosen victims? These aren't even people who oppose you. They may even be people on your side. But just to select and kill 300 people for nothing so that you can gain power. That's hard for a Western person to assimilate, and it's hard to believe. But the other thing is that they were highly invested in Yeltsin and Putin. Yeltsin in particular was depicted as a symbol of democracy.
Yeah, that's what actually I was about to ask. Was there a purposeful ignorance because we had just won the Cold War? You know, the U.S. had finally the West has taken that stride where we defeated communism, that it was so hard to come to terms that what had came after was...
Well, we wanted very much to hope, of course. But when it became obvious that something was wrong, we didn't want to face the truth. And the other thing is that a lot of people's careers depended on, a lot of very uninformed people were making statements about Yeltsin and Putin. And now, even to this day, they try to cover up and justify their own misjudgments.
So there was two other situations as well. One where it was in a theater, and then one in a school. Both extremely brutal. Once again, blamed on Chechen nationalists and various terrorist activities happening within the Russian state. But again, often ignored in the West. So can you speak to both of those situations a little bit? And then again, how it's another example of the true idea of Putin kind of showcasing himself?
Well, we're talking about in 2002, there was the seizure by terrorists of the theater on Dubrovka. And they took about 1,000 hostages. It was a mass hostage taking. And that would not have been possible without cooperation from the FSB. And in fact, there's evidence that FSB agents had a role in training the terrorists. The terrorists assembled an army in Moscow, in the center of Moscow, in order to do this, and passed undetected, or at least undeterred. And then when it was all over, and the halls had been flooded with gas, killing hostages and incapacitating the terrorists, gunmen went through the hall, shooting at point blank the unconscious terrorists, obviously not interested in getting any information from them because they already knew what had happened. In the case of the seizure of the school in Beslan, a similar mass hostage taking in 2004, the FSB and the police received repeated warnings that this was going to take place, and they ignored them. And the terrorists who took over the school had just been released from Russian prisons. And at least one of them was clearly working as an FSB agent before he was turned into a double agent. So they provoked these incidents, and then they slaughtered the hostages, and it was all done for political purposes. In other words, this is just the same psychology that was reflected in the bombing of the buildings was reflected in these two terrorist incidents.
That's what I'm curious. What was the goal with those two instances?
Well, in each case, there was pressure to solve international pressure to solve the Chechen war situation diplomatically. And as a result of these two terrorist acts, which were blamed on the Chechens, but instigated by the FSB, were used, to choke off this international support, and also to demonize the terrorists and identify them as, they demonize is a bad word there because they are demons, but it was to demonize the Chechens, and identify all Chechens with terrorism, and thereby discourage international support for any type of negotiated settlement.
So Vladimir Putin as well, in many ways, one of the weirdest aspects of this is that when you asked a lot of Russian people, his numbers have been high in terms of approval rating for decades now. A lot of that has to do with the propaganda apparatus that has been created. How is Vladimir Putin able to create his own propaganda in terms of, in a capitalist society, in a free society, all relative? And what differences do you see between the ones that when you first arrived in the Soviet Union and the propaganda was surrounding you there versus the modern day Putin era type of propaganda?
It's important to bear in mind that there were other reasons for Putin's popularity besides propaganda, including the fact that the country experienced a huge economic boom. And that made a tremendous difference.
What year was that?
Well, in the 2000s, the prices of raw materials, particularly oil and gas, went way up, and that was a huge windfall for Russia. And of course, in the 90s, the mechanisms for a market society had been created, and there was vast unsatisfied demand. So the combination of these factors led to a sustained economic boom. You didn't need propaganda desperately if the living standard is continually going up. But the propaganda now compared to the Soviet times, propaganda was used to create, it wasn't just to lie, it was to create an entire alternative to the truth, an entire false reality. They don't do that now. What they do is, of course, in the critical questions that are important to them, they try to, they falsify, but they don't. They do it on the basis of fact. In other words, they draw erroneous conclusions. They inject, to a certain extent, some invented material, but it isn't on the Soviet scale.
So we come to 2008 as well, and it looks like there's going to be a transition in power, but you, one of the few people speaking up that this wasn't going to be a transition of power, that this was simply biding time for Putin to evidently take a full stranglehold.
Yeah.
What was your view in terms of the West's interaction at that time, and almost an inability, or rather a purposeful ignorance, to not look at the situation once again that was in front of them?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I myself, together with Boris Nemtsov, who was murdered in 2015, we tried to persuade a person who was going to be a chief political advisor on Russia to Barack Obama that the true nature of Putin. But I mean, I think the combination of careerism, superficiality, Barack Obama's own lack of understanding and unjustified self-confidence in this area all played a role. They just didn't want to hear about it, and now, of course, it's too late.
Can you provide some background on who Nemtsov was?
He was an opposition politician in Russia who was murdered in the shadow of the Kremlin by Putin. He was crossing a bridge, and he was just shot dead.
This is another thing that's been a trend with Putin in terms of, it's interesting because when comparing with the Soviet Union, we talk about there was a shift in terms of the approach was more of a psychological approach, and Putin seemed to move back towards the hardline approach. Do people see this within Russia? Do they just think that these are all just coincidences, or do they?
No, I think that they probably pretty much understand and don't care. There's a very low level of civic consciousness in Russia. There's a situation in which they believe that that all politicians behave this way. That yes, he's a gangster, but who isn't?
So then we enter 2014 and we see the invasion of Crimea. There was the Orange Revolution before that. We saw kind of a breakdown of Ukraine and, really pushing towards the West. What do you think, for one, was kind of the key dynamic there? And two, what do you think Putin or influenced Putin's decision-making in terms of looking at losing Crimea?
Well, I think that Crimea was, Crimea in 2007, Putin made a statement in an interview with a German publication. He said, "We have no pretensions as far as Crimea is concerned. It's he recognized it as part of Ukraine, but Crimea was important. Seizing Crimea was important because it boosted his popularity, and it really boosted it after the seizure of Crimea in 2014." Putin's popularity rating reached 90%. There was a wave of euphoria in Russia as people became convinced that Russia was returning to its former greatness, as they put it. And so this was a button that he knew he could push. And that euphoria lasted for about 5 years before it began to wear off. And at that point, he became interested in other buttons. And he thought that the invasion of Ukraine, full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 would be very quick, very effortless, and would bring huge benefits for him.
And that brings up an interesting point. So I've heard arguments that many people say that we've pushed Ukraine, we pushed Russia in their corner by continuing to move up UN, and that in Putin's decision making, NATO, yes, that Putin's decision making here was not looking to protect the Donbass region, not looking to take Crimea, anything like that, but to shelter his own power by not having these free democracies right on his border. Do you lend credence to that? How do you?
Well, the second part is true. That definitely the Maidan revolt in 2013 scared the Russians, and the spectacle of a spontaneous popular revolt overthrowing a kleptocratic ruler that scared them a lot, and their first concern was to distract the population by seizing Crimea. And again, changing the conversation, just as they did in '99, at the time of the Second Chechen War, and when the bombings of the buildings. The idea, I think, was simply that. This was the best way to hang on to power. This was the best way to consolidate the power of the small group at the top in Russia. And in fact, it worked. I mean, the issue of the massive corruption, the unfair distribution of property, that's all been forgotten.
Was there a level that it was starting to break down before the invasion?
Well, in 2011, when the parliamentary elections were openly falsified, that led to mass demonstrations in Moscow and Petersburg and elsewhere.
What do you think the effect of COVID was, both on the Russian people and Putin himself? Like I said, I had a discussion with Mikhail Zager in the past, and he highlighted how Putin sheltering with, blanking on their name right now, but two of his right-hand men.
Yeah.
It led to this furthering in his belief of the Orthodox Christianity, and also the idea of bringing the old Soviet Union back together. Did you see a trend in that? Did you see a shift in the Vladimir Putin? Obviously, he's always been who we thought he was, but COVID itself shifted him maybe even further into something else.
I don't know. I don't have. I'm not sure about that. I think that he didn't need any particular shift. That this, the habit of starting wars. I mean, that's what brought him to power, was somebody started a war. Yeltsin was ready to start a war. I don't think he needed a big incentive to start a war. I think the idea was that he saw it as advantageous. And as for the religiosity stuff, that's just masquerade.
So we see the invasion begin. What do you think, as you highlighted, that there was expectations this would take a matter of weeks? They would take Kiev, they would raise the Russian flag, and all would be good.
In Kiev, yeah.
Suddenly we have a years-long war that likely is going to be continuing on for the foreseeable future. I mean, there's murmurs now of possible discussions, but in the general consensus, if this continues the fighting, it's going to be continuing for a long while. What do you think was Putin's miscalculation? And with that, how do you think that he either decided to pivot or is still currently pivoting?
Well, I think that his miscalculation was he grossly underestimated the willingness of the Ukrainians to fight. He underestimated the readiness of the U.S. and the West to aid them, and he underestimated the effect of Russian corruption on the Russian army and its military effectiveness. Now, those are all factors in what we have here. What the future will hold. Putin is ready to sacrifice the lives of Russians without limit. And as he's made clear, there's no, it's mass murder which is what this is, does not faze him. And question is, can the Ukrainians break through? Can they? Is there any chance there'll be a collapse of the front in Russia? The front's pretty weak, but so far we haven't seen signs of collapse. Now, that could come. We have to hope that it does. It would be the best outcome for everyone, but there's no counting on it. So I don't know what to say. I mean, we just don't know. A lot will depend on what happens in the U.S. Right now, we have not a powerful, but a significant lobby consisting of people who think that, this is getting too expensive. They're getting tired. The idea that they should be tired when it's the Ukrainians who are being slaughtered, I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous. But okay, that's what's happening. I don't think that they will necessarily betray Ukraine, and I hope not. The situation requires exactly the opposite, that Ukraine be supplied with the weapons it needs to achieve a breakthrough. But it's a dangerous game. We've proven in the past that we're very fickle and very disloyal. So as a people, I hope we'll understand the importance of what it is we're defending.
Do you think it'd be a massive mistake if we made peace with Putin in this situation?
Oh, absolutely. The preconditions for peace don't exist, because he will not cede territory that he is presently occupied without it being reoccupied, and this time by the rightful owners.
That creates a dynamic, though. What do you think has to happen from Ukraine for, I guess, the toppling of Putin? What situation? And I'd love to get to this in a second. We saw Prigozhin, in many respects, that looked like it was the end. Like that looked like it was it.
For a few minutes, for a few hours there, it did.
And like that. But again, so this is an example that at any time, history happens. What needs to happen on the Ukrainian end? Because some people fear that if they were to break through and start attacking Russia, the nuclear problem becomes present.
True. I mean, anything is possible, but the nuclear weapons would be difficult to use in that situation because there's no clear separation of the forces, and also it wouldn't change the issue. I mean, that would not prevent. It would, on the contrary, evoke massive retaliation from the United States, and create a situation in which the Ukrainians would fight on desperately.
Do you think the Russian people would go? So this is also the argument I've heard, and I kind of go with this as well. I think if Putin made that call, I would hope that people within his military apparatus, but also just the Russian people in general, would look at that and say, this is a step too far. This is where we're pushing it.
They might. And they might be afraid of retaliation.
Yeah. I mean, that would be the worry. So, but with that, what do you think Ukraine has to do to topple Putin? Is it a genuine push into Russia?
Well, I think that it's not a question even of toppling Putin. I think it's liberating their territory. And I think that in order to do that, they need to deploy modern weapons, the most modern weapons, as skillfully as possible. They've had some successes, but the counteroffensive as a whole has not produced the breakthrough that we all hoped for. What do they need to do differently? I mean, I'm not a military expert, but I hope that continued effective resistance will eventually bear fruit.
Do you think there's any chance that Putin, I mean, how would he frame that, having to essentially lose the war, to pack up, go home? Thousands of Russian soldiers died. There's crackdowns. There's everything that happened. How would Putin frame that? Is he going to look to a way to make this a win?
Well, he'll declare victory. He'll just withdraw, and that's what Yeltsin did.
And people
in the first, just say that we taught them a lesson, and they'll never forget, and we're victorious as always, and no one has ever entered our soil. And I don't know. I think we leave it to him to decide how he's going to explain it, but he'll present a defeat as victory. That's for sure.
So going to Yevgeny Prigozhin, who is infamous in many ways, weirdly enough became a Western hero for a minute there. And I was also like, guys, we have to remember who this guy is too. Like, it's not, people are so eager to get rid of Putin that we kind of forget that the next guy.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, he's no angel for sure.
What was your initial thoughts when you saw that situation begin?
It was. I thought it might be coming apart at the seams, but I'm not particularly. I wrote about this in National Review, by the way. It was not particularly happy about Prigozhin, but anything that would end the war and weaken Putin would have been welcome.
So I guess looking at that, do you think, and I had Kervin O'Coin on previously, in his opinion, he looked at it as it was a reestablishment of power by Putin, being able to, not only get Prigozhin off, but eventually, all likelihood, killing him.
Oh, yeah.
But with that, there was questions that saying, is there a breakdown there in his oligarch or apparatus he has surrounding him? But in your opinion, do you see this as a sign that there is a breakdown, that we're going to continue seeing this over the next few years? Or do you think that his reaction to this and evidently putting it down was an example of him solidifying his power and letting the oligarchs know who's in charge, quote unquote?
Yeah, we really don't know. I mean, the most powerful force, the force that might have been capable of challenging him, was the Wagner Group, and now they've been defanged. So I think if there's opposition to Putin, it will come in a different way. And quite possibly the breakdown of morale on the front, a palace conspiracy. We don't know, or maybe nothing, or maybe just defeat.
Yeah. Well, that's not exactly defeat, but I am interested in, we were talking about Israel Hamas at lunch and what's happening there. And there is a shift in dynamic towards Western leaders looking at more focus in that area. Do you think Putin sees an opportunity here as well to kind of, it's not to say it's a proxy war, but it's an opportunity for our funding to get shuffled elsewhere versus Ukraine? And is it in his interest?
You mean as a result of the Middle East? Or
yeah.
Well, I think that's one of the things. He may have had a role even in advising Hamas for the simple reason to drain U.S. resources. And I'm sure they hope for that. I'm not sure that it will. They'll get what they're hoping for, but yeah.
That's what, because it seems like, not to say it was opportunistic, but just with everything playing down, obviously they have that level of strength over Iran. Yeah, just
possibly. That's something that's just hard for us to know.
I guess looking to wrap up here, what would you hope Western leaders' interactions moving forward would happen? I guess both on if Russia wins this war, how do we operate moving forward? And if Russia loses the war, how would we operate with Russia moving forward?
Well, if they lose the war, then it's a completely different chessboard. And, it would be very welcome if the U.S. could avoid making some of the mistakes we made in the past. We might be obliged to adopt a position of non-intervention. Nonetheless, it would be to our advantage to try to create conditions in which it was advantageous for whoever emerged to reestablish relations with us. And, for that reason, we need to know exactly, what the damage was, what do they need most, in the hope that maybe we can reach out an accommodation in which we give it to them. So that's, that's pretty much as I see it. If he wins the war, we see that Russia is being turned into a completely militarized state now, in terms of education, manufacturing, budgeting, and everything else, indoctrination. Then the NATO allies will definitely be in danger. Whether he will risk actually taking a step to invade them is another thing. But we could expect that there'll be daily exercises intended to intimidate them.
The worry being, as we discussed throughout this episode, there's a level of ideology that's been lingering with the Russian people for the very beginning.
Yeah.
If everything worked out how we'd want it to work out, we have an opportunity
for nation building. Could we change that base psychology? We couldn't, but developments could. If Ukraine had, was to become solidly in the camp of the West and to demonstrate the resilience of democratic institutions, that would have an enormous impact on Russia.
How do you mean? So,
as an example, because people do know Ukraine, they know they have Ukrainian friends and relatives.
I guess the recap question on that would be, would it be hard? It seems like Russia has a history of the hardline leader, the leader that's all encompassing on the country. Mm-hmm. And your first or one of your initial conversations where they believe democracy is one leader.
Yeah.
How do you shift that perspective to make them comfortable with? Well,
we wouldn't be able to do that, but I mean, breakdown of the existing system would create incentives for them to do that. For example, they know that the alternative to cooperating with the West is falling under the tutelage of China. They don't want that. They also know that the long-term economic interests of cooperating with the West far outweigh the benefits they can get from India and Mexico. So, I think that were Putin to be replaced, our role would be just to create incentives to the degree that we can for proper behavior on the part of his predecessors.
For the final question, for taking a look at the U.S., we highlighted this idea of this wokeism, this ideology that's kind of been lingering over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
What can the United States learn from both the rise, the fall of the Soviet Union, the rise and fall of Putin, Russia itself? What can the U.S. learn, and what can we apply that to today to make sure that we don't go down a similar path?
Well, I don't think we're going to go down a similar path because our history is very, very different. But we need to be aware of the dangers. If we need to look at the whole of Soviet history and be aware of the dangers of mass psychology, and we need to encourage in everybody, and particularly the new generation, the habits of thought, the critical habits of thought, and that will allow them to defend their views and their individuality. I think that's the secret.